I started a podcast. What am I even doing here? Does any of this make sense? Does anyone care besides me? Will this ever be able to support me financially? Am I wrong? Is this all frivolous? Am I delusional? This is just a sample of the questions that haunt me in this chapter of my life. They weigh me down, distract me, and poison my ability to stay present and grounded. They sap my energy, power, and sense of agency. They hold me back like shackles chained to my ankles as I walk out this process of seeking and becoming. I endeavor to craft a life and a life's work brimming with a greater felt sense of aliveness, one that authentically expresses the most core parts of what matters to me and connects me with and serves those who believe what I believe and care about what I care about. A vital part of my process involves this world that I'm seeking to build for fellow seekers in pursuit of truth, the ones who are also crafting their own life, rich with aliveness and significance. This is the world of the Comma Project, a space for authenticity, depth, connection, meaning, for curiosity, creativity, and wisdom, for story, for humanity. It involves you and me together. It's more than it seems. Why do those questions haunt me? This is just a newsletter anyway, right? Just words on a page. Why so serious, dense, intense? Because it's not just a newsletter. It's so much more. It's my life. Not in the sense that I used to believe, when my perception of my identity, worth, and the magnitude of my success or failure as a person was determined by my job title. It's my life in the sense that Comma becomes alongside who and how I become. I strive to build the Comma Project as an extension of who I am at my most core, authentic, fundamental level. As my own process goes, so goes Comma. Comma is an offering, my offering, of perspective, connection, and perhaps even some wisdom sprinkled in. It's an invitation to join in my process of forging my own path and crafting my life in harmony with the things that matter to me. Comma is rooted in the belief that one man's story is every person's story. That if I share the stories and insights, mine as well as others, that guide me along the way, they just might matter to you too. Said another way, Comma matters to me simply because I care. Because it matters to me. Perhaps the simplest way is best. Perhaps no other explanation is needed. So, I started a podcast. Why? Several reasons. Number one, obsession. I'm obsessed with podcasts. I love them. I listen to about 2 to 4 hours of podcasts on any given day. Podcasts are human. They naturally bolster story, depth, and nuance. Listening to podcasts is one of my favorite ways to share in perspective, connection, and wisdom. I learn so much from them. Connected with stories of other seekers, I often feel less alone, less crazy, and more affirmed in my vision and dreams. These stories bolster me in the face of those haunting questions that chase me down. As Comma's own number one follower, obsessed and passionate about the stories and ideas that you and I explore together, it is an extension of my process, after all. I crave a Comma podcast to go even deeper. Number two, intuition. Beyond logic and rationale, a podcast simply feels like the next right thing. The idea and vision of extending my work through Comma into a podcast is accompanied by a steady, invisible pull in my gut that I'm learning to identify as my intuition. Again, in simple terms, it matters to me, and I want to. Perhaps no other explanation is needed. Number three, fear. The idea of creating a podcast scares me. It ramps up the volume of those haunting questions. It's an act of vulnerability, putting myself out into the world. And doing so at the very earliest stage is even scarier. I'm an amateur's amateur, a beginner. I'll work to learn and improve, but it still is scary and unnerving to start. I'm the worst I'll ever be at podcasting, and yet it's at this point that I must start. Just like anything, I must start where I am. Growth happens at the edge. Also, as the Chinese proverb says, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. In this beginning stage, I'm inspired by an idea from Seth Godin on what Nike gets wrong. Seth says that language matters, and instead of just doing it, we should simply do it. That with a simple switch of language, our whole perspective and therefore our actions can change. That just doing a thing discredits our very real experience of the difficulties of doing the thing. By living via a code of simply doing the next right thing, we honor the significance of the actions we take in our lives moment to moment, while grounding ourselves in the reality of the lower than feared stakes of crafting our lives. It can help us move our visions from hope to action, and therefore closer to the vision itself. It gets us out of hiding behind a big, distant dream of the future and into the attainable impact that an hour, a day, a week, a month, or a year can have on the proximity of what we hope to accomplish. As Annie Dillard writes, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. A schedule is a mock-up of reason and order, willed, faked, and so brought into being. It is a peace and a haven set into the wreck of time. It is a lifeboat on which you find yourself, decades later, still living. This code of simple action is a tool that we have in our belts to face down the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that can so often feel like the cost we must incur to progress in the desired direction of our lives. And so I started. What's the podcast about? Spoken versions of written essays. For when you'd rather watch on YouTube or Spotify, or listen on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts than read. Live explorations of ideas. Think of these like extra essays in visual and audio format. Sometimes they'll be piggybacking or expanding on an essay from that week, exploring other facets or textures of the stories and ideas that didn't quite fit in the written version. Other times, there'll be new ideas, like episode number 1, sharing more context behind the what and why of comma, or number 2, exploring what I learned from volunteering as a counselor at a high school leadership camp. These will be explorations of ideas similar to those I cover in written essays, but in a live spoken format. Conversations. There are many fantastic interview podcasts out there, but so many of them cover topics that sound more like the guest's bullet point list of impressive, high-status accomplishments from a resume, or talking points written by a publicist about their new book or product launch, than the messy, beautiful, nuanced roller coaster ride of our human experience. The best of them comes close to the roller coaster, but from my perspective, the conversations happen from the top of the ride, from a point in time in life when their accomplishments have earned them an invitation to be a guest on a podcast. As I've said, what matters to me is the process, all of it, including and especially the path through the depths of pain and struggle, through the messy middle of growth during the climb, to the peak of triumph, and back and forth again and again. The whole of a person and their story matters to me. And that's what the Comma Project is and will be about. It's about the process, for stories of those in the process. So on the podcast, I'll have conversations with leaders and seekers who are in the process. We'll talk about the process. Because for those who seek, the triumphs are only a part of life. And our process includes all the parts. This is simply the beginning. If you're enjoying what you see in Comma or find it meaningful, it would mean the world to me if you shared it with other seekers and leaders who care about what you and I care about. I'd also love to hear any feedback or ideas you have about any of this. To some degree, this is all an ongoing experiment. There are so many great sources of stories and insights out there, and my intent isn't to be just another one. I strive for Comma to be a meaningful spark of inspiration, connection, and wisdom for you, me, and anyone else who joins us. I'm on the hunt for ways that comma can innovate authentically. So if you have any suggested topics or questions you'd like explored, ideas for new formats, books, podcasts, videos, or essays I'd love, send them my way. I'm eager to explore any ways to deepen the world of comma, and I'm all ears. In terms of the podcast, I'm simply starting. But in other ways, this has been a long time coming. I'm surprised to see that this is post 34 in just over a year, and 40 in total since 2020. That's more than I would have guessed, but nowhere near what I hope to contribute over the years ahead. There's a long way to go, but I'm excited and energized by what lies ahead. Thank you for joining me. I'm really grateful that you're here. Onwards.